Good evening, my friends. Tonight, something absolutely stunning is happening inside Russia. Something that Vladimir Putin has spent decades making sure would never happen. And yet, it just did. A Russian general, one of Putin's own ranks, and for the first time has publicly admitted what the Kremlin has been desperate to conceal: Russia has been defeated. Yes, you heard that right. Russian military leader, a man with decades of loyalty to Putin, cameras, and demanded the one thing that has always been considered unthinkable in modern Russia, that Vladimir Putin resign. Now, let's just take a moment to breathe that in. This isn't coming from Western intelligence. Memo, or for the first time in modern Russian history, ranking military officer has broken through the tightly controlled veil of Kremlin messaging to publicly acknowledge what many inside and outside the country have long suspected. Russia's military campaign in Ukraine is failing. This isn't a whisper in the corridors of power. This isn't a clandestine leak. This is a senior general, has spent decades serving under the very regime that has stifled dissent, standing in front of a camera and saying with clarity and undeniable force, Russian military has suffered a defeat that cannot be concealed. The sheer audacity of such a statement cannot be overstated. Public loyalty to the president is treated as a matter of survival. This is not simply a political critique. It is a seismic rupture, the gravity of the moment. For years, Vladimir Putin has carefully curated an image of unassailable strength, projecting an aura of control over both his military and the Russian populace. State-controlled media has consistently reinforced this narrative, portraying Russia's operations in Ukraine as precise, calculated, and inevitable. Every setback has been spun as a strategic maneuver. Every casualty has been minimized, reframed, or omitted entirely. And yet here is a man who has lived and thrived within that system, speaking not in code, subtle insinuations, but in plain truth, directly contradicting the Kremlin's own portrayal. Are not just inconvenient for Putin, they are explosive because they pierce the very mythology that has sustained the regime. Even more significant is the identity of the messenger. This is not an opposition politician nor a dissident living in exile, a foreign analyst speculating on military failures from thousands of miles away. Operated within the highest levels of Russia's defense apparatus. He understands the inner workings of the system, the chains of command, the strategies that failed, the intelligence that was ignored, and the miscalculations that led to loss after loss. When someone with that level of insider knowledge speaks, it lends credibility that no amount of foreign reporting can match. The Kremlin can denounce him a traitor or attempt to erase the moment entirely. But the seed has been planted. Once the truth of failure emerges from the mouth of a trusted insider, easily be buried again. The context amplifies the shock. Russia's military, long portrayed as disciplined and invincible, has faced repeated setbacks. The narrative from Moscow has remained unwaveringly controlled. Generals and officers have largely complied with a culture of silence and obedience, understanding that any public critique could end careers, or worse. For one of them to step forward publicly represents not just a professional risk, a personal one, a challenge to a system that historically does not tolerate open dissent. Chose to speak now suggests the situation is more dire than ever when loyalty is outweighed by the need to confront reality in the system are no longer theoretical, they are visible, tangible, and undeniable. And then there is the audience to consider, reverberates far beyond the walls of the Kremlin. Soldiers, citizens, international observers, and even adversaries are listening. Russian citizens accustomed to carefully curated messaging, hearing an authoritative voice admit defeat is a jolt to the national psyche. Community, it validates intelligence reports and first-hand accounts of the conflict's realities. And for the soldiers in the field, have experienced the chaos, attrition, and loss, this admission may provide a rare sense of recognition that their sacrifices, losses, are being acknowledged at the highest levels. It is impossible to underestimate the symbolic weight of this moment. A general publicly acknowledging defeat is not merely a reflection on a military campaign. It is a reflection on the credibility of the state itself, on the narrative that has held a nation and its leadership together for decades. By speaking has introduced a fissure into the image of invulnerability carefully cultivated by the Kremlin, and that fissure has the potential to grow. That even the most controlled political environments are vulnerable to truth once someone inside decides that silence is no longer sustainable. In the corridors of power, this is a Russian general on Russian soil saying enough. And if you know how iron-fisted the Kremlin operates, what an act of courage or desperation this truly is. In an extraordinary and almost unprecedented move, General did not stop at acknowledging military failure. He went a step further, publicly demanding that Vladimir Putin resign. A minor critique buried in a classified report or whispered in private meetings. This is a direct challenge to the very heart of power in Russia, in a manner designed to be unmistakable. In a country where dissent from the top is historically met with swift retribution, this act signals a rupture that goes far beyond the battlefield. It strikes at the foundation of political authority that has held the Kremlin together for more than 2 decades. Themselves are explosive, accused Putin of putting his own pride and personal ambitions above the lives of Russian soldiers and the welfare of the nation. The decisions that led to catastrophic losses in Ukraine, not as errors in judgment, but as failures of leadership, trade a president who is out of touch with the realities on the ground, someone willing to gamble with the future of an entire country to maintain an image of invincibility. Environment where criticism is often punished by imprisonment, exile, or worse. To speak these truths publicly is a declaration of both courage and desperation. Particularly shocking is the symbolic weight it carries. Putin has long relied on a carefully constructed aura of untouchability. Dissent from within the military ranks is one of the few threats that can visibly erode that perception. Officers' demand for resignation is not simply political commentary. It is a challenge to the legitimacy of the regime itself. It communicates to citizens, soldiers and international observers alike, that the narrative of control, competence, and inevitability may no longer hold. The message is unmistakable. The regime can fail, and those at the top can be held accountable. This public call for resignation also reverberates through the military itself. Officers and soldiers who have followed orders without question for years are now confronted with a precedent. The highest rank has openly questioned the ultimate authority. This may embolden others to speak, act, or, at the very least, reconsider their loyalty. Figure breaks the silence. The barriers that maintain hierarchical obedience can start to crumble, can spread in ways that authoritarian systems find almost impossible to contain. General's statement also carries significant implications for Putin's inner circle. Political aides, advisors, and other generals must now grapple with a fundamental question. Where does their loyalty lie? Will they continue to support a leader whose decisions have been openly condemned by a figure of authority, or will they begin to hedge, to calculate survival over allegiance in a system where fear has been the primary tool of governance? The smallest hint of dissent can set off a chain reaction that destabilizes decades of centralized control. Response to such a statement cannot be ignored. For world leaders, analysts, and intelligence communities, merely a confirmation of battlefield realities, it is evidence of cracks within the Russian political structure. It changes the calculus of diplomacy, strategy, and sanctions. Allies and adversaries alike are forced to reconsider what stability means within Moscow's corridors of power. When the leader's legitimacy is openly questioned by his own military, it shifts the perception of risk, opportunity, openings in ways that could alter the trajectory of the conflict itself. Finally, the timing of this demand amplifies its impact. In moments of crisis, public sentiment is volatile. The general's words may resonate with a population already fatigued by losses, economic strain, and propaganda fatigue. With authority validate long suppressed doubts can ignite conversations, shift attitudes, long-standing narrative of unshakable power. It is more than a statement, a spark in a landscape that has been carefully cultivated to suppress dissent. Sparks have a way of turning into fires that reshape political realities. The cracks in Russia's military structure are no longer subtle, layeringly visible, and the impact on morale is profound. Reports from multiple sources indicate that troops on the ground are questioning orders, are deserting, and in some cases, entire formations are surrendering without resistance. The sense of discipline and loyalty that has long been a hallmark of Russia's armed forces is eroding at an alarming pace. What makes this situation extraordinary is that this is not a consequence of enemy action alone. It is a direct result of leadership failure, operational mismanagement, and a disconnect between command and the realities faced by soldiers every day. Soldiers, once operated under the assumption that their orders were inviolable, are now confronted with repeated scenarios where strategies fail, do not arrive, and casualties mount. For many, the ideal of serving a strong, disciplined military under a competent leader has been replaced with frustration, fear, and disillusionment. Charged with executing orders begin to doubt their purpose and question the competence of their superiors. The chain of command begins to unravel. Like Russia's, where obedience has historically been non-negotiable, this level of dissent is both remarkable and dangerous. Toll on soldiers cannot be overstated. Many report facing extreme stress and exhaustion, compounded by inadequate support, insufficient supplies, sense of abandonment by the leadership, morale once bolstered by nationalistic rhetoric and state propaganda, replaced by cynicism and despair. Every failure on the battlefield is not just a tactical setback, enforcement of the perception that sacrifices are being demanded for little strategic gain. In this context, the defection of confidence among troops becomes both a symptom and a driver of deeper instability. Compounding the issue is the visibility of these failures. Previous conflicts, where information was tightly controlled and setbacks could be minimized or hidden, age ensures that news of losses spreads rapidly. Videos, testimonies from the front lines filter into social media and independent channels, soldiers and civilians alike, a real-time understanding of the challenges faced by the military. This transparency, combined with the admission of failure by high-ranking officials, amplifies the sense that the institution itself is faltering. Leadership plays a critical role in maintaining morale, and when that leadership is perceived as incompetent or disconnected, the effect is catastrophic. Inspire confidence among troops who have witnessed repeated miscalculations and unnecessary losses. The gap between the promises of the Kremlin and the reality on the battlefield is widening, leaving soldiers in a precarious position, orders blindly and risk further catastrophe, or challenge the directives of their superiors and face possible punishment. A volatile environment where small acts of defiance can escalate quickly, further destabilizing the military structure. Precedent suggests that once morale collapses within an armed force, recovery is exceptionally difficult. Trust once broken between soldiers and command, rebuilt. Units that surrender or disobey orders not only compromise immediate military objectives, but also set a precedent for others, creating a cascading effect that undermines the cohesion and effectiveness of the entire force. In a system where loyalty and discipline are paramount, erosion of confidence signals a deeper crisis that extends beyond the battlefield, threatening the stability of the regime itself. The broader implications are significant. Low morale does not exist in isolation. It reverberates through the entire military ecosystem, affecting recruitment, strategic planning, and even the political calculations of leaders who rely on the perception of a disciplined, capable force. When soldiers lose faith in their leadership, it emboldens critics, encourages dissent, credibility of the institution both domestically and internationally. The combination of battlefield losses, leadership failures, morale creates a perfect storm, one that is increasingly difficult for the Kremlin to manage or contain. The Kremlin is reacting with predictable urgency to contain the fallout from a general's unprecedented admission of failure and public call for Putin's resignation. Media has entered what some analysts are calling full-scale damage control mode, aggressively attempting to erase evidence of the general's statements, flood the airwaves with denials, the messenger as a traitor or a pawn of foreign influence. Every outlet, every channel, communication is being mobilized to maintain the image of unshakable authority and to reassert the narrative that Russia remains strong, disciplined, but in an era of instant communication and pervasive digital networks. These efforts face extraordinary challenges. Attempts to suppress information have, paradoxically amplified the attention it receives. Clips of the general's address, once shared online, spread rapidly before censors could intervene. Social media platforms, encrypted messaging apps, and even private networks are filled with discussions, debates, circulating videos that validate the claims of military failure. For ordinary Russian citizens have grown accustomed to carefully curated state messaging. Seeing a high-ranking insider publicly challenge the official narrative is shocking and destabilizing. The carefully maintained illusion of control enforces a confrontation with a reality that propaganda has long sought to obscure. Reaction reveals the depth of its concern. For decades, state media has functioned as the central mechanism of power, shaping perception and limiting exposure to inconvenient truths. When a trusted figure from within the military openly defies this structure, is the fragility of the information apparatus itself. The very channels that have enforced loyalty and obedience are being undermined, not by external enemies, but by truth emerging from within. Every deleted clip, every clarification, every claim that the general is a foreign puppet or traitor only signals that the state recognizes the threat posed by acknowledgement of its failures. Beyond media manipulation, the political machinery of the Kremlin is reportedly in crisis mode. Closed-door meetings among top officials, consultations with advisors, surveillance of potential dissenters are all indications that the leadership understands the gravity of the situation. When a single statement can trigger such internal upheaval, it reflects the precarious balance of control upon which Putin's regime relies. That even one act of defiance can inspire a cascade of public dissent or elite disloyalty is enough to unsettle the most disciplined authoritarian apparatus. Narrative dominance is not occurring in a vacuum. The broader population is watching closely state actions and media messaging in real time. For Russian citizens, the contradiction between what they witness in official channels and what they see circulating through alternative networks is creating cognitive dissonance, a dangerous phenomenon for any authoritarian regime. When the state's portrayal of reality no longer aligns with observable events, trust erodes, and the foundation of control begins to weaken. In essence, frantic attempts to suppress information may inadvertently reinforce the credibility of the general's statements. International observers are also scrutinizing these developments. Censorship and messaging campaign signals that the Kremlin recognizes the seriousness of the threat posed by internal dissent, that such overreactions can indicate vulnerability rather than strength. The global audience, which has followed the conflict closely, sees the dissonance between official Russian narratives and actual events, seeing perceptions that the leadership is losing control and that internal fractures are widening. Meanwhile, media inside Russia acts as a pressure valve that cannot easily be shut. Citizens, soldiers, and insiders share, comment, and speculate, creating a network of information that exists beyond the reach of traditional state control. Each viral post, each circulating clip, shared account chips away at the Kremlin's narrative monopoly. The combination of public military defiance, active citizen engagement, scrutiny is creating a feedback loop, a dynamic in which attempts to suppress information only magnify its reach and impact. The intensity of the Kremlin's rescores the stakes involved. This is not simply about a single general's statement or one moment of embarrassment. About the variability of the state to maintain a coherent narrative, control public perception, and project power internally and externally. Tools are compromised. The regime is forced into constant reaction, perpetually addressing cracks that grow larger with every attempt to patch them. The inherent fragility of a system built on fear, suppression, and controlled messaging. The political earthquake triggered by a general's public admission of defeat and call for Putin's resignation is reverberating through the highest echelons of the Kremlin. Senior officials, long accustomed to unquestioned loyalty and centralized control, reportedly scrambling to assess the stability of the regime and the potential fallout from this unprecedented act of defiance. Closed doors are said to be tense, urgent, and filled with strategic calculations about how to respond without further undermining authority. Perception is power. Dissent by a trusted insider has created a crisis that cannot be contained by conventional political maneuvering. signals to the political elite that the unassailable facade of Putin's rule may be more fragile than previously imagined. Advisors and ministers relied on proximity to power as both protection and privilege, must now weigh the risks of continued loyalty against the possibility of a regime in decline. A single general introduces uncertainty into a system where certainty has been meticulously manufactured. Closest to power begin to question the durability of leadership. It threatens to trigger hesitation, internal rivalries, and a search for alternatives, destabilizing the hierarchy from within. The optics of this situation are significant. For years, the Kremlin has projected unity, competence, and invincibility upon population and to the world. The sudden emergence of internal criticism, especially from a military figure, shatters that carefully constructed image. Russian officials to confront the reality that the narrative of strength is no longer universally accepted, even among those entrusted with enforcing it. Perception and reality creates a dangerous vacuum, one that is fertile ground for speculation, rumor, and opportunism. Every move, every decision is now under heightened scrutiny, and any misstep could accelerate the unraveling of control. Effects extend beyond the Kremlin's inner circle. Regional governors, military commanders, bureaucrats who depend on the central government for legitimacy are watching closely. They are faced with a critical choice: their allegiance to a leader whose authority is now openly questioned, or hedge their bets by subtly aligning with emerging narratives of change. Totalitarian system where loyalty is both a tool and a threat, such calculations can destabilize governance at every level. Once doubt takes root faster than decrees or propaganda can suppress it. This moment also redefines the stakes for the regime's coercive apparatus. Security forces, agencies, and law enforcement have long functioned as instruments of control, ensuring obedience and punishing dissent. Ranking insider openly challenges the leadership. These forces face a dilemma. Risks exposing the depth of internal fractures and escalating unrest, but inaction risks emboldening others to speak or act. Creates operational paralysis, where the very instruments designed to maintain stability are constrained by the fear of further destabilization. Actors are observing these internal fractures with intense interest. Allies and adversaries alike are recalibrating their understanding of the Kremlin's durability and the potential for shifts in policy, strategy, or even leadership. The political elite in Moscow, aware of global scrutiny, must now navigate a landscape where external pressure intersects with internal uncertainty. Every decision is amplified, every action interpreted, and every miscalculation carries consequences far beyond the walls of the Kremlin. Most striking is the symbolic significance of this political shockwave. When those within the system challenge its legitimacy, the nature of power itself. Authority is no longer absolute. It becomes contingent on perception, loyalty, respond effectively to unprecedented crises. The act of defiance by a single general is less about individual ambition and more about exposing the cracks in a system long thought invulnerable. In doing so, it creates a moment of opportunity, speculation, and uncertainty. The smallest hesitation or miscalculation by the leadership can cascade into far-reaching consequences that reshape the political landscape. When a general publicly admits defeat, the implications extend far beyond the battlefield. It signals a potential turning point in the very foundation of Putin's authority. Historically, totalitarian regimes survive by controlling narratives, suppressing dissent, and projecting an image of invulnerability. With credibility steps forward to contradict that image, it erodes the core of power that has long insulated leaders from accountability. The general statements are not merely tactical observations. They are a fundamental challenge to the legitimacy of a leader who has relied on fear, propaganda, and a meticulously crafted mythology to maintain dominance. The ripple effect of such a public acknowledgement can be immense, because it touches every layer of governance, loyalty, and perception within the state. The broader significance lies in the psychology of power and obedience. Years, Putin's rule has depended on the assumption that those within the military and political elite would maintain unwavering loyalty regardless of setbacks or failures. The act of a general breaking that loyalty publicly sends a powerful signal. Most disciplined and high-ranking individuals are willing to challenge authority when the cost of silence outweighs the risk of speaking out. is seismic because it not only undermines confidence within the elite, but also demonstrates to the broader population that the image of a flawless regime is constructed, not absolute. Once the myth is cracked, it can spread rapidly, inspiring others to question dissent or even act. Amplified by timing and context, Russia's prolonged military campaign has been marked by repeated losses, logistical failures, international isolation. Citizens, long exposed to state propaganda, are increasingly aware of contradictions between official messaging and the reality they witness. When a credible insider validates what many already suspect, it acts as a catalyst, encouraging public reflection and dialogue that authoritarian systems typically work hard to suppress. General's admission becomes more than an isolated statement. It becomes a reference point for a nation grappling with the disparity between narrative and reality. The statement has strategic resonance. Allies and adversaries alike are watching closely assessments of Russia's political and military stability. For foreign leaders, analysts, and intelligence communities, dissent emerges from within the military hierarchy suggests that the regime's control may not be as absolute as previously thought. Influence diplomatic calculations, military planning, and the broader geopolitical balance. In essence, statement from a credible insider reshapes perceptions, not only domestically, but across the global stage. Within Russia, the act carries immediate consequences for the military and political apparatus. Officers, bureaucrats, and regional leaders are forced to confront a new reality, can no longer be assumed, and the calculus of survival may require reevaluating allegiances. Security services, often relied upon to enforce obedience, acting too harshly could exacerbate dissent, while inaction risks emboldening others. Of authoritarian control are put under stress by the emergence of public acknowledgement from someone within the system, creating an environment where uncertainty spreads faster than orders can be enforced. This turning point is further magnified by symbolism. Shows that once cracks appear in authoritarian systems, the perception of vulnerability can be as consequential as actual structural weakness. General's public admission acts as a lens through which both citizens and the elite reassess the stability of the regime. It demonstrates that power is not immutable and that even deeply entrenched systems can fracture when individuals with authority begin to speak openly. In this sense, a reflection of current instability and a potential accelerant for broader change. Acknowledging defeat publicly also redefines expectations within the military and political hierarchy. Long-standing assumption that criticism or dissent must remain private, showing that truth, when spoken by a credible insider, authority that fear and propaganda cannot easily counteract. It is a reminder that authoritarian power is contingent, that loyalty is not infinite. Courage or desperation can create openings where once there were none. The reverberations of this defiance are already being felt. Continue to influence the political landscape, the morale of institutions, and the calculations of those in power.